I mean, this is the first show that we're recording in 2026. Hell of a year. What are we in on day six? And how many countries are we at war with? But
Yeah, I feel like, and this may be my column for the LA Times this week. I think already this week things have happened, not just Venezuela, that could impact the future of politics 2026, 2028. So it's been crazy.
no, it is, and but okay, look, can we just start with let's never forget this is the fifth anniversary of January 6th, 2021, and the more we look back on that, the more I think that was a real transformational moment, a real transitional moment. That was I think the New York Times had the editorial that Donald Trump is the January 6th president, which is exactly right, and we all thought it was a big turning point back then. This was it. This was the end of MAGA. Instead, as they pointed out, it was a turning point toward an absolutely lawless President Trump. And a lot of the things that are happening right now are really do flow from what happened that day and the way it transformed the Republican Party and MAGA.
Yeah, I think it was Will Salatan who said Venezuela is his second at a regime change, at a coup. Um, no, look, I remember Barack Obama. No, it was Michelle Obama. After Barack won in 2008, said something to the effect of, "This is the first time I've ever been proud of my country." I'm
Mhm.
paraphrasing, but it was something that I didn't really care for,
Yeah.
and I think it turned a lot of people off. But I kind of get what she's saying, that like electing Barack Obama sort of said something about America and proved
Mhm.
that we were a country capable of electing, an African American man to be president. And I felt like after January 6th, when we then elected Donald Trump, I don't want to go as far as to say it, but like that was kind of the first time that I was like, I'm not really proud of my country. I'm not really sure we are who I thought we were. Look, I love America, but the fact that we elected the guy who did what he did on January 6th, um, I still can't get over that. I'm still
Well,
stunned that
good,
we did that.
good. Because you think about what we were all experiencing 5 years ago today, what we thought the day afterwards, the number of people who resigned from his administration, who quit his cabinet. He was an absolute pariah for at least that 24 hours, or that 48 hours. And everything we know and we have learned about on January 6th, from the January 6th committee, from the Jack Smith investigation, the videos. I mean, I can still see them in my mind's eye, right? I mean, we watched what happened in real time, and then to watch the moral universe be turned upside down, where Republicans rallied around Donald Trump,
Mhm.
and they turned this vicious seditionist, insurrectionist attack on the Capitol into this day of love and their patriots. And here we are, Donald Trump, who sat in the middle of that criminal conspiracy and that attack on the Capitol, is back in power, absolutely unscathed, and he's pardoned all of the people. You watch
Mm.
those videos and you realize he pardoned each and every one of those people who were attacking the Capitol, including the ones that beat the cops. It's it's
So,
it's really a
yeah,
shocking moment in American history, and it's what does it say about us? You're right.
I remember I was sitting right here 5 years ago, sitting in West Virginia, working for the Daily Beast at the time. I actually just did a podcast. I did a podcast that morning with Olivia Troy before all hell broke loose, and she was predicting that this could happen already. She was concerned. I wasn't as worried. What's funny is my son, who was 10 years old at the time, was like, "Oh yeah, there's going to be a riot. This is going to be ugly."
Mm.
And then later, later I bumped into Olivia at a Georgetown cocktail party or something, and she said, you should sign him up or think about getting him involved in the intel community when he gets a little older, because he may have this sixth sense. A lot of people who work in this business have this weird feelings that something might go wrong.
Well,
So he was one of those people.
that was brilliant of him. I remember, and I went back and I looked at what I was writing and thinking at the time, and I remember having a conversation or following, former Congressman Denver Riggleman, who eventually went worked for the January 6th committee, and he was predicting. He said all of these red lights are blinking. Remember, there was actually a big rally in December. Some of the MAGA folks, which was kind of a dry run. And so I went back and I read what I wrote, and it's pretty clear. It's like this is going to be big. This is going to be big. January 6th is going to be something's going to happen. And yet, even though I wrote that, I was totally shocked
Yeah.
when it actually happened. I mean,
Yeah.
and I am. It's even more shocking when you realize how close. It was. This was a close run thing. If Mike Pence had been who we thought he was, as a MAGA loyalist, if he had done what Donald Trump ordered him to do, if he had done what J.D. Vance has pledged that he would do, I mean, we don't want
Yeah.
to talk about a constitutional nightmare. It turned out to be a constitutional nightmare
Yeah.
anyway. And so,
Well, people
but
forget too, Charlie. People forget too. It wasn't just one day that spontaneously happened.
no,
Donald Trump spent months denying the election, trying to overturn it, intimidating people, making phone calls, having meetings at the White House. And then he summoned Americans, his supporters, to Washington, D.C. Then he said, "March with me to the Capitol." He led them there. I mean, all of this is widely known, but I think we do forget. And it was shocking. And I remember that day, my mom, whom I, love and just spent time with at Christmas, said, "I'm done with Trump." After January 6th, she saw it on TV, couldn't believe it. Charlie, I don't have to tell you, she voted for Trump again.
oh my God, I'm really sorry to hear that.
And,
Well, no,
and,
you
and she's
bring up.
not alone. I think a lot of people probably were outraged on that day and came around later.
Except that the more we learned about what happened that day, the worse it actually became. And I look back on this I mean, as you point out, this is really important to understand because it's been so well documented. This was a months long conspiracy that we didn't fully understand at the time. I didn't take it as seriously as I should have at the time. Donald Trump woke up on the morning of January 6th, I think, believing that he had a chance to stay as president of the United States. I mean, think about that for a moment. They tried the courts, they tried to intimidate the legislature. Then they summoned the mob to do all this, and they came so close. And you think that even after that attack on the Capitol, so many Republicans voted to not certify the election, which was a day of real infamy, the election deniers. Um, and I think back on the various off ramps that could have been taken. Obviously, the impeachment process. If Mitch McConnell had gone the other way, if Mitch McConnell had done what he knew was the right thing to do, how history would have been different. If the incoming Biden administration had said, we need to make this a priority to hold the people who attacked the Capitol accountable, if they had not decided to drag their feet, might this have been very, very different? Because I think that Jack Smith is correct. I think that he had enough evidence beyond a
Mhm.
reasonable doubt to get a conviction for Donald Trump's role in this criminal conspiracy. Instead, Donald Trump is the president. He has all the power. And by the way, isn't it interesting that the MAGA position now is that our courts cannot hold our president accountable for crimes, but it can hold other countries' presidents accountable for crimes. So world
Yes.
turned
Well,
upside
maybe
down.
maybe we should move on there, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, you and I haven't spoken since the what are we calling it? An invasion of Venezuela? It was an invasion, and they
Exactly.
took out. They captured Maduro. They say kidnapped. That's what the current leader says. But whatever you want to say, um, and you know, in a second, I think we'll probably talk about Stephen Miller because that interview on with Jake Tapper on CNN's worthy. But just where do you stand, Charlie, broadly speaking? Because you and I haven't spoken about like what this says. Like, were you surprised? What do you think it all means?
Well, yes. I mean, I was surprised. And look, I mean, on one level, let's make it clear: the world is a better place that Maduro is not in power. This was an impressive military operation. On the other hand, this is Donald Trump. Basically turning the United States into from the beacon of freedom into the neighborhood bully. And you have to see this in context. You have to see it in context of who Donald Trump is, whether or not Donald Trump has any sort of a coherent strategy, which he does not, and what he's going to do with these precedents. This new America First Don Roe doctrine, where he's essentially now asserting complete control over the Western Hemisphere. What I thought was interesting was first of all, and by the way, get to Stephen Miller. On the one hand, they're saying this is just law enforcement. He's a drug dealer. You know,
Yeah.
this is not war. And then, of course, you have Stephen Miller and Donald Trump coming out and saying, no, no, that was an invasion. We kidnapped the guy,
Yeah.
and we did it because we want the oil. I mean,
Yeah.
fuck democracy. It's just like we want the oil. We're going to get the oil. Donald Trump is now talking about state socialism for big oil companies. I guess it's just the naked raw imperialism without any pretense that the United States actually is within the international order or is engaging in some sort of a legitimate process.
It's funny. I interviewed H.W. Brands, the noted historian, last year, who wrote a book about Charles Lindbergh, FDR, and it's called America First. This was the first America First movement. And a point he made to me was that the America Firsters like Lindbergh, um, they weren't really isolationists. They didn't want to get bogged down in Europe, but they were fine with taking, if they needed to, Greenland or whatever Western Hemisphere country they needed to. That was their plan to stop the Nazis if things got that far. Rather than they'd rather fight them over here than fight them over there, I guess. But the point that I'm making here is this is not new. History may not repeat, but it certainly rhymes. And it may be. I don't think Trump really has any coherent worldview or philosophy, but if he does, this would map on to the original America First philosophy, which, according to Brands at least, wasn't isolationist. It was uh, just opposed to getting involved in European war.
Well, yes, and no, because of course we do have the entire history of the Western world since World War II and the creation of NATO and the creation of a rules-based international system and the consensus that large, powerful countries do not have the legal or moral right to swallow up their smaller neighbors simply because they're stronger. Stephen Miller basically saying, yeah, we have the right to take Greenland because we have the biggest stick, in the Western Hemisphere. So also, I think it's always a mistake to try to think that Donald Trump has any sort of a long-term strategy here. And also, in terms of Greenland, Greenland is an ally of ours. I mean, it's part of the kingdom of Denmark, but they are a NATO member. We can do anything we want with Greenland. We can put any base on. We can defend it in any way that we want. So, what is it about Greenland? On my podcast today, I talked to Ann Applebaum, and I asked her this question: what exactly is Donald Trump's obsession with Greenland? And she says that, well, the Europeans think it's because it's really like big on the map. Look on the Mercator
Yeah.
map, and it's really big. And Donald Trump likes something big, and he thinks it's going to make him great or something. But in terms of actual strategic value, it doesn't have any because if we go into Greenland, we destroy NATO. I mean, it's very clear. The Danes have made it clear that if you go in, you attack an ally like this, NATO is done. And by the way, Matt, going into
Well, technically, the other NATO, members would be compelled to defend
that's what they're
Greenland,
saying.
right? I mean,
Well,
technically, I don't think it would happen. But here,
yeah,
the other thing too, Charlie, is this a tacit permission structure
mhm,
for China to invade Taiwan, Russia to stay
of
in
course it is.
Ukraine? That's the thing. Is Trump basically saying that, well, look, we have our sphere of influence. We're going to exert our power and our dominance in our part of the world. And that means who are we to judge you if you want to control this little island off the coast of your country?
Look, yes, very clearly, and he laid this out, I think, in this national security document or whoever wrote that. They're going back to a kind of the three spheres of influence approach, or at least it looks like that. You know, Donald Trump controls the Western Hemisphere. Putin gets Europe. China gets Asia. Well, there are a lot of other countries in there that have some agency that might have some say in on all of this. But what is the moral authority of the United States in saying to Russia that it is deeply wrong for you to seize, attack Ukraine if we are attacking other countries in our
Yeah,
hemisphere because we can? What is the moral argument or the legal
yeah,
argument against Taiwan? I mean, against China seizing Taiwan here. And by the way, it's very important, I think, to stress that going after Greenland is very different than going after Venezuela or Iran. You could argue there that you bomb bad guys who pose a threat to us. Greenland is not a bad guy. It poses no threat to us. It is an ally. It would be a naked, raw,
Yeah.
neo-imperialist grab. And I'm sorry to sound like some sort of a Noam Chomsky type, but what else are we talking about other than Trump now has imperial ambitions?
And I mean, to your point, Charlie, having the moral high ground is not simply a nicety. Like I'm for it on the merits, but it is a political cudgel. I mean, Ronald Reagan, bingo card for for us here. Um, Ronald Reagan really effectively made a moral argument against the evil empire. And it worked. And I would say it wasn't just Reagan, it was also Pope John Paul II and Thatcher. But they made a moral argument, and it inspired um, people who were oppressed. And I think ultimately it very much contributed to the defeat of the Soviet Union. So I think it's both. It's unwise to sacrifice that moral high ground, but that's gone.
It
As
is.
far as I'm concerned, here's what I don't understand about Trump. Let's say that you're purely Machiavellian.
Yeah.
Why would we settle just for this hemisphere? I mean, I feel like America's influence, and I know we're probably not as dominant as we were like in the 1990s, where we were kind of the sole superpower, but I think we have great influence over the entire world. Why would we want to step back and say, we'll be one third? China, you can be just as good as us. Russia has no right to be in the same conversation with us or China. Why would we give them that? That to me makes no sense, even if you divorce all the morals from it.
It is really actually possible that Donald Trump is not a big strategic thinker. Is that possible? I mean, that he hasn't really thought this through. And by the way, I mean, don't assume that he doesn't have those ambitions. Look, again, understand that we're talking about, a guy who has unripe bananas in his for his cerebral cortex. But I mean, he's been talking about Trumpifying Gaza. I mean, he's obviously very interested in the Middle East. He's obviously very involved there. So, I don't know that there is a really coherent strategy here, except that it is this new like 19th century raw power. The other thing is you saw these reports that he says, and whether it's true or not, who the hell knows, that he consulted with the big oil companies before and after
Hmm.
the attack on
Hmm.
Venezuela. Wait, he
But he
didn't
didn't
consult.
consult Congress.
No, but yes, that's kind of interesting. And I guess it's part of you and I remember, when people on the left would say, no blood for oil, no blood for oil. And we had to say, okay, that's not why we're fighting in Iraq. But Donald Trump has been consistent in one thing. He's been always saying we should go over there and take their oil. You should take their oil. And so I guess it's just the raw nakedness with which he and Stephen Miller are basically saying, yeah, we are a superpower. We're going to act like a superpower, and we're going to take what we want because we can.
Yeah.
Understand this is not a straight. I mean, look, there have been moments. Look, we attacked Panama, right? We invaded Panama. We went into Grenada. We've done a lot of things. We went into Iraq and Afghanistan, but um, Donald Trump is doing it in such a nakedly transactional manner. It will be very interesting to see how Congress whether it has any response whatsoever to being completely neutered, on this issue and on the question of what happened with Greenland, which I can't believe we're even talking about.
I actually
Did
have
you,
the
did you
Stephen.
think it was a joke?
And in a second, I did initially. And
Yeah,
in a second here, I'll read Stephen Miller's actual comments.
please.
But first, I just wanted to say my latest Substack, Charlie. I talked about how if Ronald Reagan or George H.W. Bush or Marco Rubio, even President Rubio, let's say in an alternate bizarro world where he won in 2016, if they had done what they did, what just happened in Venezuela, I'm pretty sure I would be applauding it, and then I'd be 100% on board with it. And there are obviously, though, those presidents would have had some sort of a moral argument. They would have made a coherent philosophical argument for why this is imperative. They would have explained it to us. I wouldn't have had any fear that there was imperial ambitions or that it would lead them to taking Greenland or Canada or something. But still, it makes me wonder: would I have been wrong to support them, even based on my trust for them? And I don't know the answer, but it's got me. There's a lot of problems with Trump, but one of the benefits of Trump being president is I think I'll speak for myself as a kind of a never Trump conservative. It has given me the liberty to really ask myself
Oh,
these questions. And, I think you can think you're open minded, but you're sort of always a team player. But now that we
this is so
don't
good.
have, I don't have a team, so I can't be a team player. And have you gone through a similar sort of
Yes.
introspection?
Yes, and in fact, I had one of those moments when I read your piece. But just could you give me a moment here? I know this is live, but I got a 140-pound dog that's pounding on the door here. Uh,
You
I,
got it,
I
man.
I made the mistake. Here we go. Here we go. I made come on, and he wants to lie under the desk. I made the mistake of closing the door, and he's like, "Hey, no,
Uh-oh.
I belong in here too." No, I actually had the same question when I read your piece. And did I have objections when we went in and arrested Noriega in Panama? No. Did I have any objections when we went into Grenada? No, I did not. And yet, you do think about the precedents that these create. And I think this is something that we all, and by the way, people on both parties need to ask themselves, what precedent are you creating for the future for somebody who might not have the same motivations that you might have? And here's a mental exercise for you. Try to imagine if it was China that was doing the things the United States has been doing.
Hmm.
Imagine if China, now how many countries have we bombed in the last, say, year? Okay, we've been bombing in Iran, we've been bombing in where Nigeria, we've gone into Venezuela, we've gone into, I mean, Yemen. Imagine if on a regular basis China was sending troops into the Middle East. China was kidnapping leaders of other countries that they didn't agree with, was invading other countries. If you know, you can't really do it because we've gotten so inured to, well, America does this because America's the world's policeman. What if the policeman goes rogue? This is one of the reasons why you have, international law, because you don't want to entrust that power. Because now Donald Trump is basically saying, I can swallow up anything on my continent. Well, what do you think Vladimir Putin and President Xi are saying? And then what is our objection going to be to all of that? But you're right. You think back on the things that we very casually went along with in the past, and I think I hope that people are more open minded and are rethinking their priors, and I hope they're thinking about that on the left as well as on the right.
Definitely. All right. Let me read this. This is from the New York Times, but they're talking about Stephen Miller's interview with Jake Tapper on CNN. And so I'll start with the quote from Miller. Quote, nobody is going to fight the United States militarily over the future of Greenland, Mr. Miller told Jake Tapper, this CNN host, after being asked repeatedly whether he would rule out using military force. The remarks were part of a vocal push by Mr. Miller, long a powerful behind the scenes player in Trump administration policy, to justify American imperialism and a vision for a new world order
Yeah.
in which the United States could freely overthrow national governments and take foreign territory and resources so long as it was in the national interest. Quote, we live in a world, and in the real world, Jake, that is governed by strength, that is governed by force, that is governed by power, he said. Quote, these are the iron laws of the world since the beginning of time.
Well,
There you
Mussolini
go.
could not have put it better than that. The thing about and I'm deadly serious about it. The thing about Stephen Miller is, to call Stephen Miller a fascist is not a pejorative. It's a description of his ideology here. And I hope that he keeps talking, because I think he clarifies exactly, the might means right. And this is who the
Yes,
United States is. And you know what? Not only will the rest of the world begin to think differently about the United States if this is our attitude, I think Americans are going to start to think differently about their country, because I like being an American. I love America. But I think that part of it is thinking of that we Americans are the good guys. What if
it
we
is.
are the biggest bullies with the nastiest club on the block? How does that change our own psyche about who we
Yeah.
are as a people?
Charlie, this is a really interesting point. This will be a little bit esoteric of an example, but I saw someone once say that everything's context, right? So, like, if I had showed you a picture of a smokestack 100 years ago, that would have meant prosperity to you. You would have seen a smokestack and you would have thought, "Wow, this is success. This is prosperity. This is business." Now, if you see a smokestack, you think pollution, right? The dirt. Uh, I grew up in a family. My dad's a prison guard in Hagerstown, Maryland for 30 years. One of my first memories is dad taking me to the polls when he votes for Reagan in 1980. He was in the National Guard station in Baltimore in the 60s during the riots. That's the sort of milieu that I come from. And my father-in-law was a park policeman in DC. And so I growing up and I'm taught, respect the police, respect authority. And my mom's like, if you're ever lost, just go to a policeman. They'll help you. They're the good guys. I'm taught they're the good guys. Charlie, now I see police. I'm like, I tense up. And I'm not doing anything illegal, but I'm just like, oh, those are the guys that I see kidnapping off the streets, immigrants or whatever, right? The context has changed. And so that's the danger that Donald Trump has changed our perception of all sorts of things, whether it's America, the way that he is. I think Christianity is another example. And I think that's a real problem. As a Christian, I worry that he's not going to, the fact that Donald Trump has co-opted evangelicals and faith leaders, that doesn't change my relationship with Jesus. But if I were someone who was not a Christian, I would probably run the other way at this point. Like if I saw a preacher or an evangelical televangelist or something, I would be like, oh, these are those people. I'm not going to go to your youth group. No, thank you. Invite someone else. I'm not going to your, whatever hymn sing. And I think that's part of the damage he has done is the perception. And it's not just international, how the world sees us. It's how we see us.
No, I agree with you. And in fact, you know, I listen to a lot of Sirius XM radio when I'm walking the dogs and everything. And they had this ad for this one insurance company. And at one point, at the very end, they said, this insurance company, a Christian-based company. And I'm thinking, absolutely not. Now, where did that
Can't
come
trust
from?
them.
Because I'm yes, exactly. As opposed to because I'm thinking, oh no, you're MAGA. Why would you throw that in? I want a good insurance company. So yes, I think it changes all of this, and this is what we have to push back against. And I've written a couple of rants about all of this that because I've had this conversation and I've had this personal reaction where you see a pickup truck drive by, and I'm sure in West Virginia you see a lot of these with the big American flags and everything, and you know exactly who they are. And I have this thing like, wait. I cannot have that reaction to the American flag. I love the American flag. It's my fucking flag. It's not your flag. You do not get to take that flag. You do not get to co-opt and kidnap all of the symbols of this country and of our values for your own purpose. So we have to struggle to kind of
Yes.
pull those back. But it's becoming harder and harder to do those things because,
10
these
years
things are,
in, 10 years in or
we
11,
we are
whatever.
we are 10 years in, and because I do think that what's happened, this conversation we're having now does link to the conversation we started with about January 6th. And I would urge everyone, of course, to watch my interview with Ann Applebaum, because right at the end, because we're talking about Greenland, we're talking about Venezuela, and right at the end I asked her about January 6th, and she says, think about the people that have gone to work for Donald Trump, who are surrounding Donald Trump after January 6th. Think about the kinds of people that who really kind of hate American values, who hate those American traditions. Those are the people who are in power right now. Those are the people who are making these decisions. And what you're seeing is that so the Republican Party gelded itself. MAGA radicalized itself, turned itself into kind of a quasi-revolutionary entity. And those people are now making these decisions and they're pulling the mask off. And they're saying this is about raw power. We are going after the shithole country. Stephen Miller is not, I mean, he's just, you lay it out. What he's talking about, the third world immigrants. I mean, it is a war against, non-white immigrants in a way that I never thought I would hear this rhetoric in the 21st century. And here we are.
Yeah. It's almost like we didn't learn anything from World War II, the Great Depression, the Cold War, history. Those who failed to learn history. We got a lot. By the way, great show so far. I mean, hell, we could call it a day here, but bonus content. Where do you want to go though? We've got multiple topics here that we could talk about. How about Minnesota? We should talk Minnesota.
Oh my God.
We should talk Minnesota because So there was a fraud story in Minnesota where it does appear that there were, I guess, daycare centers that were bilking taxpayer dollars. They tended to be, I think, Somali daycare centers. It appears that although Tim Walz was not necessarily complicit, the governor of the state, he should have had his eye on this better, and he has now resigned. Um, that has all sorts of implications. Obviously, the immediate implication: who becomes governor? What does that short term mean? But I think also, I mean, look, this was Kamala Harris's kind of one governing decision, was picking Tim Walz as her running mate. Does that splash back on her? What does that say about her? Let's just start. What do you make of this story,
Well,
John?
I never liked that. I never liked that choice, but let's leave that aside for the moment. I mean, there are so many layers of all of this. You do have a massive fraud that did take place under Tim Walz's watch. However, there were many, many indictments that had taken place years ago under the Biden administration that sometimes gets lost in the wash. That this, in fact, that the law was being enforced. Okay, that's number one. Number two, I mean, it's a real scandal. And, liberal Democrats, if you want a welfare state, you need to protect the integrity of the welfare state. You should be more indignant about this than anybody. On the other hand, there's very clear evidence that some of this was exaggerated. This video that this guy, was it Nick Shirley? Is that his name? Um, that MAGA was touting as this great revelation. Turns out to be a lot of bullshit. That he misunderstood a lot of the things he was seeing. There's a lot of demagoguery here. And deep breath here, because I'm not minimizing this. I hate the whataboutism, but we are in the midst of the most corrupt political climate, in the history of the country, where Donald Trump and his cronies are engaging in corruption on an industrial level. As he has pardoned um, crooks and fraudsters and people who have ripped off the taxpayers over and over and over again. So the whole notion that Donald Trump and MAGA are genuinely concerned about corruption is
Hmm.
absurd. It's obscene. So there's just a lot of mud being splattered around everybody. I think Tim Walz probably made the right decision. I think he probably, might have been defeated for reelection, and there are failures there. But I mean, here we are in 2026. How do you sort out, the shitstorm from the reality, the substance from the spin, the bad faith bullshit you're getting from the Department of Homeland Security and the White House. By the way, they are surging 2,000 ICE agents into Minnesota now because of this whole thing.
Mm.
Now, what the hell does that, what is that about? Other than more of this performative cruelty of Kristi Noem and the ability of Stephen Miller to go after Somalians who apparently are the minority group of choice for our 5 minutes of hate this year.
It does make me wonder, though, how effective this sort of thing could be, right? Like it's sort of like the caravans coming right before the
Yes.
election. That this could be weaponized. Look, there is corruption everywhere,
Yeah.
but as you noted, if you're a Democrat and you believe in a social welfare state, um, and it could be purely noble, right? Purely noble reasons to take care of people who need support. These instances of corruption are they completely undermine your philosophy. And when it's attached to the Somali community, as you just noted, that really touches the erogenous zone of the right wing. And you've got all of these right wing sleuths and YouTubers out
Mhm.
there. One could imagine Minnesota is not the only state where something like this might have happened. I'm just wondering, even though, to your point, there is no equivalence with what the amount of corruption we're seeing with Trump. If Fox News spends a month,
No, this
showing
is the problem.
videos.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, I mean, here's the thing that again, I know that some of our more liberal leaners hate this part of the rant. Is like, it is very important not to get so deep in the bubble that you begin to deny that problems are real problems simply because they might be highlighted on Fox News. So, for example, the way to deal with the problem of crime is not to pretend the crime is not a problem. The way to deal with the problem of uncontrolled illegal immigration is not to pretend there's not a problem. At some point, good governance is important. And if you're like a mayor or a governor, public safety, strong economy, and honest government are the basics. If you don't get those things right, you're not going to get anything right. And so it's really important not to get into this sort of denial. And I think it was Rui Teixeira who said it was the Fox News fallacy that if Fox News says something is a big problem, that there's this reflexive sense of like, no, there's nothing like that. It's not happening at all. But that is not the right approach to it. And I think this is an Achilles heel for some of the Democrats, the progressives who have been in charge of big cities, things have happened on their watch that can be weaponized and will be weaponized against them if in fact, people don't understand the need to address them. Okay, so that was my tough love message for the show today. We can
It
go back
needs
to
to
the
be
usual.
said.
It
It
does.
needs to be said. So while we were gone, because we were out 2 weeks, you and I. Although, by the way, I hope people watched our January New Year's special, which I thought was really good.
Sure.
But I wanted some things happened. I'll give you maybe we can close on one of these. I'll give you an option. So, Mamdani is inaugurated and gives a speech, and I think he talks about collectivism, which is maybe not the greatest thing to talk about. There was a big debate: is JD Vance inevitable? Because I think Vance ended very strongly. 2025. We had Bari Weiss sort of back in the news with CBS, and they're changing, having a new, promising to be even better than, more trustworthy than Cronkite, right? With the evening news. Marjorie Taylor Greene is actually, I guess, retiring officially, leaving office, and had some not so nice words for Donald Trump. An interview she did, I think, was it with the New York Times, maybe? Um, and then former Senator Ben Sass announced that he has, I think, an advanced stage of cancer, which is
Tragic.
very bad news.
Bad
Um,
news.
and any, which of these stories, Charlie, or I'll give you, it's your show. It's Sykes and Lewis, but which of these do you want to talk about?
Okay, so the Ben Sass story is so tragic because he is so young, and at one time he could have been the future of the Republican Party, and I think that's part of the tragedy. But let's just talk about JD Vance. I do not believe that JD Vance is inevitable. In part because this week it seems like it's Marco Rubio time. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't think anything is inevitable. Nothing is inevitable until Donald Trump decides to graciously pass the baton. And how likely is that to happen? Okay, that's number one. The Barry Weiss thing. Okay, I don't know how you feel about Barry. I've actually been I've met Barry Weiss. I have said nice things about her in the past. I have been somewhat skeptical about the move to CBS. I think, well, you want to talk about a rocky start, and I think there's always that danger when a talented person is put into a position for which they are utterly and completely not suited. And I think that may be the case. You not only have an ideological problem and a business problem, I think you kind of have a competence problem. Some of the stories that you're starting to hear about the chaos over at CBS, the way they're fumbling things, the last minute changes. She's a brilliant woman, but does she have good judgment? Does she know how to run a TV network? Is she able to navigate the political pressures that she's getting from the Ellisons and Trump? And boy, I have to say that I've been taking kind of a wait and see attitude, but it has not gone well at all. And by the way, where is the 60 Minutes segment on the Salvadoran gulag that she said she was holding because she wanted to make
Yes.
it better and stronger? Where is that thing?
Yeah.
Barry, where is it? You know?
Well, what's interesting is, remember, sort of the argument was they hadn't talked to any administration officials because the administration wouldn't talk to them.
Right.
And reportedly, Barry Weiss gave some of her producers, 60 Minutes producers, Stephen Miller's phone. And then subsequently, Stephen Miller said something to the effect of, "We need to arrest all the people who were, you
Yes.
know, fire. Maybe it was fire, but whatever. Like I
Right.
don't. He's a hostile witness. He is not like. Anyway, it's clearly bullshit. So I guess
Well,
my
we've already seen
problem,
this one.
I'll come back to JD. I'll come back to Vance in a second. But speaking of the Barry Weiss thing, I don't think CBS matters all that much, except for 60 Minutes, right? That to me, that's what makes that network like really invaluable, and that's to me the big problem. Otherwise, yes, it's problematic at the macro level that Trump is kind of co-opting not just new media, but old media, traditional media, establishment media. At the macro level, that's problematic. CBS in and of itself isn't what it used to be, doesn't have the luster or the appeal, except for 60 Minutes. To me, that's the real problem here. They were doing very important work that I just don't know who else has the capacity
And
to
they're
do
still
it at this
doing,
level.
and they're still doing it under tremendous the disadvantage of having these new corporate overlords. But this is the thing that I think has been the most disturbing is to watch these institutions that in the past would have stood up strongly against the abuses of power. This is like it feels like a reverse Watergate, where back then you had the Washington Post aggressively holding power accountable. What is the Washington Post under Jeff Bezos doing? I mean, it's throwing roses and flowers and sucking up to Donald Trump about the attack on Venezuela. I mean, good grief. CBS turning into what it's turning into. And so you do have this, feels like this rolling capitulation of all of these institutions, including CBS. And, unfortunately, again, Barry West is not, she's a very talented, very smart woman. But if you or I don't know, did you or I have this conversation? If somebody said, hey, Matt, you're a really smart guy. Would you like to be the general manager of the Baltimore Ravens? You might say, yeah, that would be cool. Would you have any idea what you're doing? If somebody said, hey, Charlie Sykes, would you like to be the safety director of Boeing? No, because I have no qualifications for that job. If somebody put me in charge of a television network, the fact that I do live streams with Matt Lewis and podcasts does not qualify me to run NBC, ABC, or CBS. I mean, it
Well,
doesn't.
it's the Peter principle, right? People keep getting promoted or elevated to their level of incompetence, and that's a big jump, right? I mean, like just because Michael Jordan is the greatest or arguably the greatest NBA player doesn't mean he can run a team. We saw that attempted, so
Yeah.
it's a different skill set sometimes.
Yeah.
So,
So
uh,
Marjorie Taylor Greene, what do you come down on all of this? I have been on the one hand, in theory, I like the idea of Big Tent. Anyone who's willing to call bullshit on Donald Trump is okay. On the other hand, it's Marjorie Taylor Greene. And I don't know. I think the strange new respect is a little bit dangerous because understand that she is coming at this by going further into some of the fever swamps of the right. So I don't know. What do you think? Am I being too hard on her? I'm
um,
willing to. Maybe I am, but what do you think?
so any port in the storm.
Oh,
I keep saying the Churchill line about if Hitler invaded hell, I would have a good word for
yeah.
Satan on the house, the floor of the parliament. Um, I think she's been very useful so far. And she definitely has the legitimacy, credibility to speak to people that you and I can't speak to and to peel them away from Trump. And it could be, right, that Venezuela, just like Iran, are wedge issues. That there are people who are actually care about America first and who really don't want to be involved in forever wars and regime change. And I can't really speak to them because I'm kind of for that, depending on the circumstances. But she could possibly. There may be people who peel off, and so I think she could be valuable for that. Look, I think that we're talking about is JD Vance inevitable? And I think Vance is sort of like it. I don't think that the Seattle Seahawks are inevitable, but they're probably the most likely maybe to win the Super Bowl. But would it surprise me if Denver did? No, that wouldn't surprise me either. And so that's kind of where I am with the JD Vance thing. And look, I think Marjorie Taylor Greene has to be on that list. It doesn't mean she's going to become a never Trump Republican or a Democrat. She could run for president as a Kool-Aid drinking true believer who actually wants to be true MAGA, unlike Trump.
You remember what Tom Massey said, who is the libertarian, now anti-Trump Republican? He said, what was that famous quote? It was something like, I realized that people were just going to vote for the craziest son of a bitch on the ballot, and it turned out,
Yeah.
early on that I was the craziest son of a bitch on the ballot, and that's
Yeah.
why Trump won. And so, if you apply the Massey rule to all of this, that she's there, that there will be a what 20% of the MAGA elite that will go in and go, we want the purest. We want the pure Met. We want Marjorie Taylor Greene. We don't want any of these other guys, any of these conservatives. Um, I think it's utterly unpredictable because there's nothing conventional or normal about our politics.
Yeah.
Normally, the vice president would be next in line, but there's nothing normal about this president. I still have a very hard time imagining Donald Trump graciously handing over power. Now,
Yeah.
this may seem a little extreme, but this is the guy, since we're talking on January 6th, people, he's already proven what he is willing to do to hold on to power and what he can get away with. And every time he gets away with something, he becomes more emboldened.
Yeah.
And
That's why it's so
one,
important to
yeah,
that his approval ratings are driven down because I think when and look, let's be honest, the American public saw January 6th and reelected him. So the democracy argument's not there. It's about the economy. It's about affordability. And so I think that it's very important that affordability is the issue. And if Donald Trump somehow, and I don't think he's going to turn the economy around, I think things are actually going to get worse rather than better for a variety of reasons, including AI. But if he turns it around, then maybe he stays on a third term, or maybe the vice president somehow, or maybe it's Eric or Don Jr. instead. And he pulls the rug out from under JD. So, yeah, this is not a guy who, what it reminds me of is I've seen this happen before where you're like a loyal worker there's like an old miser who runs a shop,
right.
runs a company. You work for Mr. Cratchit day in and day out, and then you think you're going to get to inherit his company, maybe, and then no, it's his deadbeat son-in-law gets the promotion at the last minute.
That is it's an old story. But I actually think that the Don Jr. Ivanka scenario is not any crazier than some of the things that we experience on a daily basis. I mean, this is the thing. It's like every single week we go, oh my God, this is really crazy. Who would have predicted all of this? And I keep coming back to this, that we have lacked imagination. And particularly, I think, again, going back to January 6th, in that run up to January 6th, now that we know everything was happening, I think a lot of people were kind of asleep at the switch because they thought, nah, he won't actually do that. With this guy, every single day, it's like they're sending us the signal. Do not underestimate what he is capable of doing
Hmm.
or capable of breaking. I mean, he is
Yeah.
capable of it. And every time he bombs a country or snatches the leader or breaks the law and gets away with it, it makes it more likely. I mean, the whole Stephen Miller story is Stephen Miller. I mean, just you can feel that guy is just like pumped up with sort of I mean, I'm trying not to use the words I want to use here. But
Goebbels.
well, I am that's pretty close. And it's like I don't have to pretend anymore. We're all on board. We can do anything we want. What happens when you have that kind of hubris up and down? And that's in the Oval Office. You can do anything. What is the iron law? Something about the iron law that the strong can do what they want and the weak must endure what they must. That sort of thing. Well, the iron law is that if you're in power, you hold on to power, right? I mean, if this is Stephen Miller's worldview, what are the other iron laws that he's going to tell Donald Trump that he can invoke or obey? How about that for a
Scary.
paranoid thought?
That's scary. And I'm reminded, Charlie, of an anonymous administration official who, in the waning days of the first Trump administration, said, "Why not humor him? What
I know.
what could go wrong?"
Yep. Classic quote was in the Washington Post. Like, okay, he lost the election, but what
What's
is
the
the
harm?
downside of this? What is the harm? Oh my God. Yeah,
Yeah.
that may be the epitaph on all of our stones. What could possibly go wrong? What's the downside of humoring him?
All right, my friend. Well, on that happy note, we can ride
Happy
off
end.
into the sunset. I guess next week I'm going to be away on assignment, but we're hopefully try to do this later in the week
We'll
next
definitely
week,
do it. Yeah.
and then we can get back on our normal Monday schedule. Good Lord willing. So
2026 is gonna be a long year, man.
that's right.
We're
Just
here for it.
imagine what will happen between now and next week's episode, Gary.
I know. Keep
Billy
notes.
Sykes.
All right.
Always a
Thanks a lot.
pleasure, man. Thank you.
Bye bye.